So we've been talking about the terrain tools, a really cool set of tools for painting terrain with various stuff. We looked at one of the bonus exercises, which is the terrain toolkit. For those of you using 18 or 19, get the toolkit 217. For those of you using 2020, get the toolkit RE. And this lets you procedurally generate terrain and all kinds of cool stuff. Today, I want to show you another one of these tools. So I'm going to share a screen here and clean this up a little bit. So this is another set of terrain tools. This one is provided for us by Unity, and it's the Unity terrain tools. They work in 219 and above, and they're available from the package manager. The package manager is one of the pull downs from our window here. We pull down the package manager, and this shows us the packages that I have in the project. And here's the terrain tools. All of these packages come with documentation that we can click on right here. And this one actually has an extra little button here for downloading some asset samples from the asset store that make this even more powerful. If we change here to Unity Registry, this shows us all the packages that are available in Unity. There are lots of them for different kinds of things. And this shows us the ones that are in our project. We also have the option here of looking at the assets that you've purchased or obtained on the asset store. They'll all show up here under My Assets. So these are all the things that I've at some point or another downloaded or purchased from the asset store. So that's how one obtains this terrain tool. Just to see some of the other features here. Here are all the different versions of it over time. I'm using the latest version, 3.0.1, and it is a preview, which means that it's not yet stable and might not want to be used for production, and a lot of preview packages are available. If you're in 219, you have to check show preview packages in order to have access to that part of the menu. I'm not sure how that works in 2020. It may be a little bit different. But anyway, the bottom line here is that we have this terrain tool that is quite a bit different than the default one. It still has the same kind of features: brush strength, brush size. This is kind of similar to opacity, the brush strength. We can rotate the brushes, we can space them differently, and there's this new jitter, which I assume is just how bouncy the brush is. One of the main things that this adds for us is a whole bunch of new brushes. Here are the standard brushes that you get with just a regular Unity. And the extras here, there's like probably 30 different brushes, some of which are kind of pre-made mountains and canyons so that you can just actually stamp topography onto your world. Here's examples of these canyons and mountains. And you'll notice they're black and white images. These are probably basically height maps that we're applying to our scenes. There are a number of other extra tools that come with this. There's some sculpting tools that let you manipulate your terrain. One of these is a bridge that lets you put 2 points on your map and it'll build a bridge between those 2 points. And unfortunately, it's not a bridge that you can go under. It's more of a ridge that goes between the 2 points. There's a clone tool for duplicating terrain. There's a noise tool that lets you paint with different types of noises. There's Perlin noise and there's fractal noise. And there's a terrace tool that makes your terrain into steps. Because the brushes are black and white height map images, there's also a set of effects that let you adjust the contrast of those black and white images. You can sharpen the peaks, you can flatten the slopes. These are all tools that let you sculpt your terrain or manipulate it. Like the toolkit, there are a couple of erosion tools that are physics models of erosion. There's hydraulic that smooths things. There's thermal that kind of sharpens things. And there's a wind erosion that blows wind across your landscape. All of these have a bunch of physics settings for slopes and solubility and other kind of physics properties. And unlike the toolkit that does it to the whole map, these are done by painting with one of the brushes. There's some transform tools for pinching that lets you kind of pull terrain towards the center of the brush or push it away from the brush. There's a smudge that lets you kind of blur it. And there's a twist that I have no idea what you would use it for. One I kind of like is the stamp terrain that just projects the shape of one of the brushes onto your terrain. And so over here in terrain under the paint tool, you'll notice I've set the height here to be 100. My terrain goes from 0 to 200. So I can now stamp, I can stamp this brush that I've picked here. It's a little mountain kind of thing. And I can just drop it over here and I instantly have this mountainous terrain. If I pick one of the canyons, where's the canyon? Well, I can't find a canyon, but if I go down here and click subtract here, this is now going to push the terrain down by the same way that it pushes it up. And so my terrain now has this hole in it. And of course, if I go in here and walk around on the world, you can see I have this nice mountain, and on the other side of it, I have that big hole. This combines nicely with the terrain toolkit's coloring abilities, texturing abilities. So here's a world. Here's a world that I colored with the terrain toolkit. So I've added the terrain toolkit somewhere here. No, I took it off, but I colored this with the terrain toolkit. And so the two of them work nicely together and you can make very pretty worlds. So any questions about this? This is an optional bonus. You make your usual hand-painted terrain and decorated, and if for a few bonus points, you add the terrain toolkit or the Unity terrain tools and get some extra points. And I believe there's a bonus too if you include a height map. So lots of bonuses on this one. You can get well over 100 on this assignment. Any questions? No? Okay, Well, I want to go on. Let me quit this. I want to go on and look at some things that we kind of glossed over earlier. You've seen prefabs in here. For instance, our first person character that I've walked around in the world was a prefab that came from the standard assets. And prefabs are easy to duplicate and maintain items. The idea here with a prefab is that you can make many, many copies of it very easily. You just drop the prefab in your scene and you get a copy of that, an instance of that prefab in your game view. If you make any changes to a prefab, all the copies will change as well. And so a prefab in our hierarchy, that is in our scene view, is an instance of the prefab. So making a prefab is pretty easy. I'll start off here. Let me just put a plane in here so I have something to see. And I'll add a little cube here. And I don't know. I think I did this business with childing objects. So if I make a little sphere here and make it the child of the cube and put it up at a height of, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Put it up at a height of 1.25. I have kind of a little character here. And I can make this into a prefab by simply dropping it into the assets. You can also make a folder that you call prefabs, and you can drop it into the prefab folder. And so now we have this prefab, and you notice this changed from black text to blue text. That indicates that this is a prefab. You can unpack it, which turns it into not a prefab. You kind of break the connection to the prefab. And we can do things like go over to our little prefab here, and I can drop copies of it into the scene, and I get exact copies of what I've made here. Now, if I access the prefab here and open it, now my hierarchy shows the little prefab, and I can do something like move this head up to 1.5 and save it. And all of my copies, all of my prefabs have changed to this. Now I want to get a particular texture that I like, and here's a little trick: importing a new asset. So this is some asset that I want to find, and I happen to know where it is. It's in one of the other games here. So I'm looking in one of the games down through the assets, down to textures, and here's this default JPEG that I want to import. So this brought in that texture, that checkerboard texture. And now if I want to make a material that I'll call checkerboard, and I can take that and drop that texture into the albedo of that material. And now I have a checkerboard material that I can put on one of my instances in the world. Now you notice that that didn't update the other ones. It just updated that one. And I believe that's this one. So if I go over here to overrides, I can say apply to all, and all of my prefabs now have that particular property. Let me make another material. I'll make a simple material. I'll call it green. And I'll make it green by picking its color here, make it green, crank it up. And now I have a green material, and I can drop that into the head of this little character. And again, I can do that, that override, and all of my little characters will have green heads. So pretty slick and easy to maintain. So we can edit them all by working with, I misspelled prefab. I can edit them all by working over here, opening the prefab. I can move everything around. I can change colors, textures, and so forth here in the prefab view, and everything in the scene will be updated. Or I can work on one independently in the scene, and when I'm ready, I can assign it. And when you're working in prefab view, you have to remember to save things. They show in blue text. Sometimes you'll make a change in a prefab and it'll say this is going to break the prefab, and you can go ahead and do that. You can reestablish the connection to the prefab by dropping it into the prefab in the view. So if we make some change and we drop it into the prefab, that then updates them all as well. There are often lots of ways to do the same thing. So I just showed you there how to apply a material, and we can do this in a number of different ways. I did that by dragging the material into the little character, but we can also look at the mesh renderer here, and the mesh renderer has a material. And so if I want to make my cube green, I can drag that green into the material setting here. And so now the base of the cube is green. If I don't like that and I want to revert to the prefab, this override button lets me revert to the prefab. So you can change instances, and if you don't like your change, you can revert back. So a lot of power here in dealing with this. And as I showed you, you create a new material with this pull down to create a material. Another tool that we'll use extensively is the context layers. And layers are something that we have for each individual object. We have this option here for the layers, and there are a bunch of different layers that come standard with Unity. There's transparent FX, ignore raycast, water, and UI. But we can add our own layer here, and I'm going to add a layer. I wouldn't add it in 3, 6, or 7. Those are special layers that Unity keeps for itself. But I'll make this a custom ignore layer, and I'm going to put my instance here in that custom ignore layer. And it asks whether I want to change all the children. This would be the include the sphere. I'll say yes there. And one of the places we can use this context layer is a camera. I'll show you this later. But we have the culling mask on a camera that lets us determine what it sees. And so you can see right here, there's everything, which means it'll see all context layers. or nothing, which means it'll see basically nothing. But I can uncheck the custom ignore, and you notice in the game view that little character disappeared because I turned off the camera's ability to see the custom ignore layer. And of course, if I revert this back to its prefab value, it goes back into the default layer and we can see it again. So we'll use this later when we get the cameras. And there are other places that these culling masks appear with these context layers. So, and we can also use this in scripts. Now, another tool is the console window. And this is available from the general here. You can open the console and dock it where you want to. I keep it going here because this is where one sees various errors and warnings and just in general stuff that we see. And let me make a very quick little script here. I'll make a C# script test, and I'll edit that, and it takes a minute for a visual to open. Should have opened that to begin with. So when you make a new script, it comes up automatically with a start and an update in it, and it has its name that I defined there, test, and it's a mono behavior, and it has various usings that are the defaults. And so here in start, I'm going to do a debug. And there are three different kinds of debugs. There's three that we use. There are a lot of them, but there's log. There's just the plain log, there's the log warning and the log error. So I'll do a log and I'm gonna print something here, testing debug. And I'm gonna make a mistake intentionally. I'm not gonna put the semicolon at the end here, which is a syntax error. I'm gonna save this, and over here in my console, I see right away that I've got an error message, and it's telling me the script that it's in, test.cs, the line that it's in, line 10, and the error that it's a semicolon inspected. And if I click on this here, it opens the editor in the script that has the offending error at the location of the offending error. So that's pretty cool. And so if I, if I put that in here and save it, now that error is going to disappear. And if I run this, I will see that debug log error or warn that debug log statement that I printed in there. Oh. Why didn't I see it? Oh, I'm sorry. I have to put that script on some object in the world. So I need to make a game object and put that script on it. Put that script on it in order for it to, the scripts won't run unless they're on a game object. And so here now in the console, I see that testing debug. And again, it tells me where it came from. It's in the test CS at line 10. So the other kind, there's a warning. There's a log warning. Whoops. and there's a log error. These are the three different kinds that we use in our scripts. And so if I wait while that compiles, and hopefully I didn't make any errors, and I run this now, I'm going to see the testing debug, the testing warning, and the testing error. And I can actually turn on and off each of these different categories with these little clickers here. Now, one really important thing that you probably want to do is to turn on the error pause here. And what this does is stop the game when it hits that testing error. So you see now it's paused. I can unpause it and it will continue on with the play, but when I run it, it stops at that line in the script. And so this is an easy way to put kind of debug breakpoints in your program. You can put in a log error at a particular point in your program where you want it to stop so that you can examine where things are and what's going on. And also, if you've got any syntax errors or missing objects, null references, any of a myriad of errors that we're going to run into when we start scripting, that error pause will stop the game when it encounters that error, tell you where it occurred, and you can go in then and figure out how to fix it. So the console window is definitely something to park in your default layout and pay attention to. We have clear on play, we have error pause, and I can clear it at any time I want to with the clear button. So that's the console. Now, another kind of cool tool that we might play with here is the animation window. And this is available, let's see, where is it? Animation, this is the animation window that you can load and park. And I've made a layout that has my animation window in it so that I don't have to fiddle around and find it again. And the animation window works like this. I select some object. And before I do this, I want to stress the importance of making a container for your object. So I'm going to create an empty, I'll call it character container. And I'm going to reset its position to 0, 0. And I'm going to put my little character in it. I'm going to make my character the child of that. And the reason for this is that when we make animations, all of the positions and rotations and so forth are relative to the parent. And objects that are just sitting here in the world, their parent is the world. So if we make an animation that has movement or rotation, it's going to be relative to the world, which would mean that that animation would always put your character at the same place in the world. Whereas if we make our character the child of a container, the animations that we make will be relative to the container, and we can then put the container anywhere we want, and the animations will play appropriately. So I select the object that I want to animate, and I go up here to my animation window. There's two there. There's the Animator, which I'll show you more of later. And I've got the scene here, and I'm going to create an animation. So this creates an animation. I have to give it a name. I'll just let it be new animation. I can also put it where I want it to be. And now I have my animation. and I need to add a property that I want to animate. So I'm going to add a property, and it shows us basically all of the different properties that my object has. There's the transform, which is position, rotation, and scale. There's the mesh renderer that has the material on it that I can alter. It has the collider that I can do things with, and it has the child, the sphere that is part of the character. So let me pick the transform, and I'm going to pick the rotation, and I add plus here, and now I have the rotation set up as the thing that I'm going to animate. Now, the animation comes up with two keyframes. There's one at time 0, and there's one at time 1. And you can actually move them around and get them out of time 0 to 1, but it's easier to let them just be in time 0 to 1, and then we'll adjust the speed later. I'll show you how to do that. So I'm going to expand this, and I'm going to pick the Y rotation. So this shows the value of the Y rotation at this keyframe, at this first keyframe. And I'm going to move over here to this second keyframe, and I'm going to set the rotation to 360. So this means my character is going to make one full rotation with this animation. And I can test this out here by pressing the little play, and you see the character rotating in the world. It's going around from 0 to 360 in each rotation. And you notice it's not uniform. And the reason it's not uniform, we can see in the curve. This is the curve, so I'll press A, and that puts it in scale. So this has picked this particular kind of curve that kind of comes in 0 slope at each end. And if I pick the little thing here, I can now adjust the slope of each of these keyframes. And there are a number of different settings. Whoops. And there are a number of different settings for these slopes, but I can flatten it out here. So now it's going to kind of rotate more uniformly as it goes around in circles. So let me stop that. I can add another property. I had the sphere over here, and I can pick its transform, and I can add its position, and I can take its position here, its Y position, and I'm gonna add a keyframe here at the center at 30 seconds, and I'll add another keyframe. I believe there are a couple of ways to do this, but I can add a key here like this. Let me go back into the dope sheet. So here's the key that I just added, and I'm going to move this up to 2.5. And now if I look at my curve for this, again, pressing A to make it scale. I gotta get rid of that A there. So now my head is going to bounce up and down, and again I can watch it bounce up and down, and so we can access basically all of the properties that we have in our character. You can access the material properties as well of both the sphere and the cube. So the other thing that's happened here is when I made that, I got an animator, and the animator is the thing that actually does the animation. And so it's using the cube that was the animation that I just made, well, is the controller for the cube, and it's using that new animation this is what an animator looks like. We'll use this a lot when we get to animating characters. And again, you can press A and it kind of zooms in. And so here's that new animation that I made. And one of the properties here is a speed. So if I make this 0.5 and play this in the world, it's now gonna rotate. Whoops, I got an error. Oh, it's because I have that script in there that has the testing error in it. So let me turn off error pause. So it's gonna animate more slowly. Now, I haven't actually put this back in as a prefab. So I'm going to take this and drop my whole container in as a prefab. And so now I have the original cube prefab, but I also have this character prefab. Let me get rid of these two and drop my character container into the scene. And so now I have another one. And these two should both behave in the same way. They both bounce up and down. Now, one more subtle little trip that we can do here, I can take that Animator, this thing that has the animation that I set the speed on, and I can make a copy of that. I'll duplicate it. And I'll call this fast. And I'm going to take this other character, cube, and in its Animator component, I'm going to drop the cube fast controller in it. So this is, whoops, where to go? Down, down, down. So I put the cube fast in here. And in the cube fast, this one, I'm going to make its speed 2. And so now one is going to rotate fast and the other is going to rotate slow. They're both using the same animation, but I'm controlling the speed. That's why we don't fiddle with that 0 to 1 for the keyframe, because we can adjust the speed in the controller. And we'll see a lot of use for this, because this is actually a state diagram that lets us make paths of things. This automatically goes from the entry into the new animation, and we'll make much more complex things as we go on. So we add properties, we've got keyframes, we can add keyframes, we can select something, we can play the button to demo it. You can actually, if I come back here to the animation window, I can actually observe my animation by just sliding this back and forth. So I can get into very fine detail about adjusting how this thing behaves when we animate it. And this is how all the characters and everything are animated in Unity. They, of course, some of them use motion capture and other kinds of complex things, but this is the basic tool whereby any object in Unity is made to move around independently, not the translation, but the animations. I'll remind you of the help page here. So for my Animator, I have this little help button that opens up the manual for the Animator component. And I believe there's, we can also look at the animation window. A warning, often when you bring in some object that has animations built into it, those imported animations can't be edited. Everything will be grayed out for them. They're read only. You can pretty easily make copies of them and then edit and by duplicating the animations, and then you can usually edit the copy. So that's the way that works. So at this point, it's a good idea to look back at what we've got here. Our assets are all kind of cluttered up with a bunch of different stuff. We've got materials, we've got animations, we've got textures, we've got the animations. I have a folder for prefabs and I have a folder for scenes. But over here is a folder that I made when I was practicing this. And this is my completed folder. And in this folder, I have subfolders for any of the animations that I made, for any of the animators that I made, for any of the materials that I made, for any of the physics materials that I might have used, prefabs, and the different scenes that I made. And so here in the root, you'd make a folder, my stuff, and I'd make subfolders in that and move all of this junk into the subfolder with all of this stuff, and then I'd go in here and organize this. Organize early as you're making things. It saves you a bunch of trouble at the end. Having an asset folder that has just all this stuff scattered around it is awkward, and it's better to organize things and organize early. So I'll stop sharing here and entertain any questions. Any questions?
Will we be doing anything with like the rate of change for the animations?
Will we be doing anything with changing the animations?
No, like you saw how it was on a graph. Are we going to do anything with like graphing functions for animations?
You can, you definitely can. If I share that screen and I do something here, I can click on this curve. This puts a keyframe in here. I can do all kinds of stuff with this and manipulate this graph. Later, when we get to some of our devices, some of the particle effects, we'll see curves that are used to control the way the particle effects work, how they manifest as a function of time. And those curves will be just like these that we can manipulate and insert keyframes and do all kinds of fancy stuff with. So yeah, you can, I guess the answer is yes, we will work with curves. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers it.
Okay, good. These curves and the curve editor are very powerful tools that we'll use with the particle effects. And they can be used with a lot of different things. You can make a curve, and then you can, in your script, you can evaluate the curve at different points in time and get a value back from it. So it's a very powerful tool. So if you haven't already typed your name in chat, please remember to do so. So I haven't much time left, but let me show you where we're headed with this. I'll save this scene and whoops, I'll save this scene, save, and I'll quit this one and go into the next scene here. So which one is this? Oh, okay. So I've shown you a little bit about importing assets, but I want to show you some of the pitfalls that you encounter when you load different assets. And there are a couple of different ways to bring in assets. So one way is by importing a package. And we import a package by a custom package, and then we have to find wherever it is on our where are we here? We have to find wherever that package is on our disk, and we bring that package in by opening it. It shows us what's in the package, and we can accept or reject things. But when I import it, it then brings it in, it makes a folder, and the folder has my LERPS character in it. And this is the FBX model of the character. It has some stuff that we'll talk about later for rigging and animation. But if I just kind of naively bring this into my scene, I want it to be at 0, 0, 0. I might be a little puzzled by the fact that I can't see LERPS here. Now, he is actually there. He's just very, very tiny. And the reason for this is that a lot of content creation, for some reason, sets their scale to 0.01. And so my LERPS is there, and he's, fully functional LERPS, but he's tiny. And you could adjust the scale here in his transform by making him bigger, but it's a better idea if you change the scale here. So if I change the scale to 1 and go ahead and apply this, now LERPS is a proper sized character, roughly 2 meters tall. And let me turn him around so he faces into the world, faces into the light. Another kind of problem that you might encounter, here's a different LERPS package. And I'll bring this one in. And again, that replaced the one that I had there. This one also has that problem with the scale, which I can apply. And it's a broken prefab, so put him in here. And in this case, the problem here is the material. LERPS's material doesn't have a texture, and the texture has to be added to it manually in order to get the texture on the character. And let me turn LERPS around here so that he's facing into the light. And another issue here on the material for LERPS here doesn't have a slot for the normal texture. And we also see this is a legacy shader. I'm going to change this to a standard shader, which is the new shader that we prefer to use in here. And now we have a slot for a normal map. And LERPS came with a normal map, but his texture type was default. I need to make it a normal map. I need to say create from grayscale, and I need to apply. And this is now a normal map. Normal maps are these purple things. And now in my material for LERPS, I can add that normal map. Come on, material. I can add that normal map. And LERPS now has bumpy texture, and I can change how strong the bumps are with this slider. This affects how strong the bumps are. I don't know what negative means, but I can make LERPS bumpier or less bumpy with that normal map. So those are just a few of the issues that you might run into. Oh, and here's another way to bring assets in. Sometimes you have a folder full of FBXs and materials and textures. And we can very simply just drag and drop this folder into our scene, and it brings LERPs in. Here, this is a different copy of LERPs now, and I can put him in the scene. And this one's actually set up okay, so I don't have to do anything to these guys. And I'm not sure what happens if I play here, if their animations run. I think their animations might run. Yeah, his animation runs a little bit. So we'll talk more about animations later. So at that point, I'm going to stop sharing and come back into the Zoom world and answer any questions. And it's 11:51, so anyone who has to run, run. Please type your name in chat before you leave. And I, of course, will hang out here and answer questions or let you chat among yourselves, whichever you want to do.
Could you please go over making a lake?
Can I go over making a lake?
Yeah.
Yeah. So did I close that? I did. Okay, did I share screen?
Not currently.
Not yet. Okay. I got it. What happened to Zoom? Share screen. Okay, so I'm going to have to open one of those terrains. I guess I can do it in terrain tools. Did it open? Yeah, here we go. Okay, so let me go into that empty terrain scene. So the key here to making a lake is that when you first start your terrain, let me delete that terrain and start with a new one. When you first make your terrain, you want to go in here and change your settings to whatever it's going to be. I'll say 200 by 200 by 100. Well, 50. I'll say 50. So this means my terrain is 200 wide, 200 deep, and can go from a height of 0 to 50. Now, the first thing I want to do here is set the height. So I'm going to set the height. This looks a little differently in the default version, but I'm going to set the height to 10, and I'll flatten all. So now my whole terrain is at 10. It can go down to 0, and it can go up to 50. So when I come in here and I paint raise or lower terrain using this little bump, here I'm going to raise terrain. So there I've raised the terrain.
Wait, can you show one more time how you set it to lower terrain?
How you lower it?
Yeah. Oh, okay, right
You
there. Yeah, I
lower
see
it
that.
by shifting. So when I'm painting raise or lower terrain, left clicking raises, shift left clicking lowers. That's not lowering. I got to flatten the terrain, set terrain height to 10 and flatten all. And so I should be able to raise or lower terrain, and by shift clicking, it should have pushed it down. don't know what's wrong. Hold control. Oh, it's control. This is the new system and it was control instead of shift. So that pushed it down. Control, left click. I guess they changed that. And just plain left click pulls it up. And so the key to having a lake is to have put all of your terrain at some elevation above zero, because you can't push it below zero. You can see here as I'm control clicking and pushing it down, it doesn't go below zero. It flattens out at zero. That
Alright.
answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. That helped a lot.
Okay, good. And I think in the default system, it's shift left click. I don't know why it was control left click, but that might because I have the Unity terrain tools loaded in there. They might be a little different. Any other questions? I'm going to stop recording here.